The sky splits open with a sound that shakes the trees for miles. Ethan Cole drops the wrench in his hand and looks up from the old truck he has been fixing behind his cabin. A streak of blue fire cuts across the night, faster than anything he has ever seen, and it does not fade like a falling star. It grows brighter. It is coming down. He does not think. He runs. The ground trembles when the object hits, somewhere past the ridge behind his property, deep in the pine forest where no roads reach. Smoke rises in a thin gray column against the dark sky. Ethan grabs a flashlight and a first aid kit from his truck without knowing why. Something in his chest tells him this is not a meteor. Meteors do not slow down before they hit the ground. This one did. The run through the forest feels endless. Branches snap against his arms. His breath burns in his throat. When he finally breaks through the tree line into a wide, scorched clearing, he stops so suddenly that he nearly falls forward. In front of him is a shape unlike anything built by human hands. It is smooth and curved, the size of a small car, its surface a deep silver that seems to drink in the light of his flashlight instead of reflecting it. One side is torn open, twisted metal bent outward like the petals of a broken flower. Steam or smoke hisses softly from a crack near the base. Ethan's first instinct is to turn around. His second instinct, the one that wins, is to step closer. Inside the wreck, past the tangled wiring and the strange blinking lights, he sees her. She is small, folded awkwardly against a seat that no longer looks like a seat, more like a cracked shell. Her skin catches the moonlight in a way that makes his breath catch too, a pale color with a faint glow beneath the surface, like something alive under glass. Her hair is dark and matted against her forehead. Blood, deep violet instead of red, runs from a wound at her side. She is breathing, barely. Ethan does not know what she is. He does not know where she came from, but he has spent 6 years as a combat medic before he came home to this quiet stretch of land, and right now none of that matters. A person is dying in front of him, and he knows exactly what dying looks like. He forces the twisted metal apart with his bare hands, ignoring the sharp edge that cuts across his palm. He works his arms under her small frame and pulls her free, laying her down on the cool grass outside the wreck. Up close, she looks almost human, except for small details that make his mind spin. The shape of her ears, the pattern of faint lines across her collarbone that pulse very slightly, like a heartbeat visible through skin. Her eyes open for a moment. They are a color he has never seen before, somewhere between gold and green, and they find his face with something between fear and desperate hope. She says a word. He does not understand it. She says it again, weaker this time, as if it is the only thing she has left to hold on to. "I don't know what that means," Ethan whispers, pressing his hands against the wound at her side to slow the bleeding. "But I'm not going to let you die out here. Stay with me. Just stay with me." Her eyes close. Her breathing turns shallow. Ethan works fast. He tears strips from his own jacket and packs them against the wound the way he was trained, applying steady pressure. Her skin is cooler than it should be, and for one terrible second he thinks he has lost her. Then he feels the faint flutter of a pulse beneath his fingers, strange and fast, but there. He cannot carry her and the emergency kit at the same time through a mile of dark forest, so he makes a choice. He lifts her onto his shoulders, her weight surprisingly light, and begins the walk back toward his cabin, moving as quickly as the uneven ground allows. The trip back feels longer than the trip out. Every few minutes he checks her breathing, whispering reassurances she cannot hear, the kind of words he used to say to soldiers on stretchers who could not hear him either, but somehow it always helped him stay calm enough to keep working. By the time he reaches his cabin, sweat soaks through his shirt, and his arms shake from the strain. He lays her on the old couch in his living room and turns on every light he owns. What he sees under proper light makes his stomach tighten. The wound at her side is deeper than he first thought, and there is a second injury along her shoulder that he missed in the dark. He does the only thing he knows how to do. He cleans the wounds as best he can with what supplies he has, applies pressure bandages, and elevates her legs to keep blood flowing to her heart. Her temperature keeps dropping despite the blankets he piles over her, and twice her breathing seems to stop entirely, before starting again with a soft, rattling gasp. Hours pass. Ethan does not sleep. He sits beside the couch, monitoring her pulse with 2 fingers pressed against her wrist, counting the beats out loud, just to have something to focus on, other than the fear building in his chest. Around 3 in the morning, her temperature finally begins to stabilize. Her breathing steadies. Color, if it can be called that on skin like hers, returns faintly to her cheeks. He allows himself to breathe for the first time in hours. It is only then, sitting in the gray light before dawn, that the full strangeness of the situation settles over him. There is an alien on his couch. He does not know that word yet. Not officially, but there is no other explanation for what he pulled from that wreck in the woods. Her ship, if that is what it was, still sits back there in the clearing, likely visible from the sky to anyone looking for it. Ethan glances toward the window, toward the direction of the crash site, and a small knot of worry forms in his stomach. If something fell from the sky, someone might come looking for it. He does not know if that is a good thing or a very bad thing. He looks back at the strange, injured woman sleeping on his couch, her chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm now. Whatever she is, whatever she comes from, he made a decision the moment he saw her dying in that wreck, and he is not the kind of man who changes his mind halfway through. "You're safe here," he says quietly, more to convince himself than her. For now. Outside, the first light of morning begins to touch the tops of the pine trees, and somewhere far above the clouds, though Ethan does not know it yet, a signal has already begun transmitting from the wreckage in the woods, carrying news of the crash across a distance he cannot imagine, toward a world he does not know exists. The hours that follow are quiet in a way that makes Ethan uneasy. He checks on her every 20 minutes, replacing bandages, offering sips of water that she cannot yet drink, watching the strange glowing lines beneath her skin pulse steadily like a second heartbeat. He has questions piling up faster than he can process them. Where did she come from? What was she running from, if that crash truly was an accident and not something worse? And what happens now that he has decided, without fully realizing it, to protect a stranger who is not even from his own world? By midday, exhaustion finally catches up with him. He dozes in the chair beside the couch, waking every so often at the smallest sound, a shift of fabric, a change in her breathing. Each time, he checks her pulse again before allowing himself to rest for a few more minutes. It is late afternoon when her fingers twitch for the first time. Ethan sits up immediately, leaning close. Her eyelids flutter, and for a brief moment those strange gold-green eyes open again, clearer this time, searching the unfamiliar room before landing on his face. There is confusion there, and fear, but also something else. Recognition, perhaps, of the fact that she is still alive, and that the man in front of her is the reason why. She tries to speak, but her voice is too weak to form words. Ethan gently presses a cup of water to her lips, tilting it just enough for her to take a small sip. She swallows with visible effort, her eyes never leaving his. "You're going to be okay," he tells her softly. "I don't know who you are, or where you're from, but you're safe here, I promise." She does not understand his words, not yet, but something in his tone seems to reach her anyway. Her body relaxes slightly against the couch. Her eyes stay open a little longer this time, before slowly closing again, as sleep pulls her back under, this time looking less like the sleep of someone dying, and more like the sleep of someone finally allowed to rest. Ethan sits back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, and looks toward the window one more time. The forest beyond his cabin sits still and quiet, giving no hint of what is already beginning to move toward it, drawn by a signal neither of them can hear, carrying consequences neither of them can yet imagine. For now, there is only the sound of her breathing, steady and alive, and the quiet certainty settling into Ethan's chest that his life has just changed in a way from which there will be no simple return. Night falls again, and with it comes a strange sound from outside, faint at first, like distant thunder rolling across a clear sky. Ethan steps onto his porch, scanning the darkness. There is no storm. The sky is full of stars, undisturbed, and yet the low hum continues somewhere far off, felt more than heard, a vibration that seems to travel up through the wooden boards beneath his feet. He thinks of the wreck in the clearing, still sitting there, waiting to be found. A cold feeling settles over him, the kind he remembers from his years overseas, the instinct that tells a person danger is close, even before any proof arrives. He goes back inside and locks the door, though he is not sure a simple lock will matter if something truly comes looking. The woman on his couch stirs again near midnight, her breathing changing rhythm, and this time when her eyes open, they stay open longer. She studies him with quiet intensity, taking in the room, the flickering lamp, the man sitting beside her who clearly has not slept in over a day. Slowly, carefully, she lifts one hand and presses it against her own chest, then points weakly toward him. Ethan understands the gesture instinctively. She is asking who he is, or perhaps thanking him, or both. "Ethan," he says, tapping his own chest the way she did. "My name is Ethan." Her lips part, and after a moment of visible effort, a sound comes out, rough and unfamiliar, but clearly an attempt to repeat the word. It does not sound quite right, shaped by a mouth unused to human speech, but the intention is unmistakable, and something about the effort makes Ethan smile, despite the exhaustion weighing on him. She closes her eyes again, but this time her hand stays loosely curled near his, as if some small part of her, even in her weakened state, does not want to be alone. Ethan does not move away. He sits there in the quiet cabin, watching over a stranger from another world, unaware that far above the clouds, something is already changing course, drawn by a signal calling it home, carrying with it questions that will soon demand answers neither of them is ready to give. 3 days pass before she is strong enough to sit up on her own, and every one of those days brings a new small piece of understanding between them. Ethan learns that her name, once she manages to teach it to him through patient repetition, sounds something like Lyra, soft and quick on the tongue. She learns his name in return, and by the second day she says it clearly enough that hearing it no longer feels strange. Communication remains difficult. Words do not translate, and gestures only carry them so far. On the second night, while searching through the pieces Ethan salvaged from the wreck before covering it with branches and fallen leaves, he finds a small device, flat and smooth like a stone, with faint lights along one edge. When he brings it to her, her eyes widen with something close to relief. She takes it carefully, presses it twice, and a thin beam of light projects a series of symbols into the air above her palm. It takes another full day of trial and quiet frustration before the device begins translating fragments of her speech into halting, oddly formal English, and hers begins to make sense of his in return. The words that come through are simple at first: thank you, safe, home. But slowly, sentence by sentence, a fuller picture begins to form, and what Ethan hears makes the hair on his arms rise. She is not simply a traveler who crashed by accident. Her ship was attacked. Not damaged by debris or mechanical failure, but deliberately struck, its defenses disabled before the impact that sent her spiraling toward Earth. She remembers very little of the moments before the crash, only flashes of alarms, a burst of light through the front viewport, and the sickening lurch of the ship losing control. "Who did this to you?" Ethan asks, watching her face carefully through the translator's soft glow. Lyra hesitates, her fingers tightening slightly around the device. The answer that comes through is slow, careful, as though she is choosing each word with great caution. She does not know for certain. It could have been raiders who prey on travelers moving between star systems. It could have been something closer to home, something she is not yet ready to say aloud, even to the man who saved her life. Ethan does not push. He has learned, both from his years in service and from the quiet wisdom of simply listening, that some truths surface only when a person is ready to speak them, not when they are asked to. Instead, he focuses on what she needs now: rest, food she can safely eat, which takes some experimenting since her body reacts strangely to most of what he offers, and above all, patience. Slowly, over the following days, her strength returns. The glowing lines beneath her skin brighten from a dim flicker to a steady, healthy pulse. Color returns fully to her face. By the end of the first week, she is walking on her own, moving carefully around his small cabin, touching objects with quiet curiosity: a lamp, a photograph, the worn pages of a paperback book left on his shelf. One evening, sitting across from him at his small kitchen table, she uses the translator to ask him a question that catches him off guard. "Why did you help me? You did not know what I was." Ethan considers the question for a long moment before answering. "Doesn't matter what you were. You were dying. That was enough for me." Something shifts in her expression, subtle but unmistakable. A kind of quiet wonder that seems out of place on someone who, Ethan is slowly beginning to suspect, carries far more weight and responsibility than her youthful appearance suggests. She tells him, carefully and in pieces over the following days, about her world, a place she calls by a name the translator cannot fully render into English, something that comes through closest to a word meaning light beyond the stars. She describes cities built into cliffs of pale stone, skies with 2 moons instead of 1, and a society built on ancient laws passed down through countless generations. She also tells him, quietly, almost reluctantly, that she is not simply a traveler. She is the daughter of the ruler of her world. A princess, though the word does not fully capture the weight of responsibility bound to her title among her people. Ethan sits back in his chair, processing this new information slowly. So back home, people are probably looking for you. Lyra's expression grows troubled. Yes. And that worries me more than it should bring me comfort. Before Ethan can ask her to explain, a sound cuts through the quiet evening air outside. Distant, but unmistakable. A low hum that steadily grows louder. The same vibration Ethan felt through the porch floorboards days earlier. Except now, it does not fade away. It grows closer. Lyra's face drains of color. She rises from the table so quickly her chair nearly topples backward, moving to the window with an urgency Ethan has not seen from her since the night he pulled her from the wreck. "They found me," she says, her voice barely above a whisper, the translator rendering the words with a tremor that even technology cannot fully smooth away. Ethan moves to stand beside her, looking out into the darkening sky above the tree line. At first, there is nothing but stars. Then, slowly, a section of the sky seems to shimmer, as though the air itself is bending, and through that shimmer emerges a shape far larger than the wreck he found in the clearing, sleek and dark, descending with a grace that speaks of technology far beyond anything built on Earth. "Is that good?" Ethan asks carefully, though the tightness in his own chest already suspects the answer. Or bad? Lyra does not answer right away. She watches the ship descend toward the very clearing where her own vessel crashed, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. When she finally speaks, her voice carries a complicated mixture of relief and dread that Ethan does not yet fully understand. "My mother has come," she says. "The Queen never leaves our homeworld unless the matter is grave enough to demand her presence in person. If she is here herself, then whatever happened to my ship was no accident, and she already suspects who is responsible." Ethan feels a chill settle over him that has nothing to do with the night air. And what happens now? Lyra turns to look at him, her strange golden eyes searching his face with an expression he cannot quite name, gratitude mixed with something that looks almost like worry, on his behalf rather than her own. "Now," she says quietly, "you meet my mother. And I cannot promise you she will be kind about what you have done." Ethan looks back out toward the ship settling into the clearing, its outer hull glowing faintly with soft light, figures already beginning to emerge from an opening seam along its side. Whatever calm life he had built for himself out here in the quiet woods, he understands in that moment that it has just come to an end, replaced by something far larger and far more dangerous than he could have imagined when he first ran toward that falling star 3 days ago. Lyra reaches for his arm before he can move toward the door, her grip surprisingly firm. "Let me go first," she says. "Please. Whatever happens, let me explain before she sees you." Ethan nods slowly, though every instinct honed by years of service urges him to stay close, to protect, to not let this young woman walk alone toward whatever is waiting in that clearing. But he respects her request, watching from the porch as she steps down into the yard and begins walking toward the tree line, toward the ship, and the small group of figures now moving out from beneath it, tall and imposing even at a distance, their forms catching the moonlight in ways that mark them clearly as something not of this world. The hum of the ship's engines fades to silence, the night grows still, and somewhere out there in the darkness, a conversation is about to take place that will decide far more than either Ethan or Lyra yet realizes, a conversation that will reach across the gap between 2 entirely different worlds and pull one ordinary man directly into its center. From the porch, Ethan watches Lyra approach the tall figures gathered near the ship. Even from this distance he can tell which one is in charge. She stands slightly ahead of the others, wrapped in a cloak that seems to shift color as it catches the moonlight, her posture rigid with an authority that needs no translation. When Lyra reaches her, the woman's arms open, and for a brief moment, the tension in the clearing eases as mother and daughter embrace. It does not last. Ethan sees the queen pull back, her hands moving to Lyra's shoulders, turning her slightly, as though inspecting her for injuries. Even without hearing the words exchanged, he can read the shape of the conversation in the tightening of the queen's posture, the sharp movement of her head toward the wreck still sitting in the clearing, and finally, inevitably, toward the cabin where he stands. He steps down from the porch before he can talk himself out of it. Whatever is coming, he decides, he would rather face it walking forward than waiting behind a locked door. The walk across the yard feels far longer than it should. By the time he reaches the edge of the clearing, 6 figures have turned to look at him, tall and still, their expressions unreadable in the pale light. 2 of them wear what look like ceremonial armor, dark and polished, standing slightly apart from the others, in a posture Ethan recognizes instantly from his years of service. Guards, the kind trained to react before they think. The queen studies him with an intensity that makes him feel, for the first time in years, genuinely small. Her eyes, sharper and colder than Lyra's, move over him slowly, taking in his torn jacket, the dried blood on his hands that he never had the chance to fully wash away, the exhaustion written plainly across his face. "This is the one," the queen says, and though her words come out in a language Ethan does not understand, the translator device clipped now to Lyra's collar renders them a half-second later, calm and precise. "The human who touched my daughter." "He saved my life, Mother," Lyra says quickly, stepping slightly in front of Ethan, though he gently moves to stand beside her rather than behind. "Without him, I would not have survived until morning." The queen's gaze does not soften. "You were found in a ship torn apart by weapons fire, drifting toward a planet with no defenses of its own, no knowledge of the wider galaxy, populated by a species barely capable of leaving its own atmosphere. And this," she gestures toward Ethan, with a slow, deliberate movement of her hand, "is the being you trusted with your survival." "He had no reason to help me," Lyra says, her voice firmer now. "He did not know what I was. He saw someone dying and he acted. That is more than some in your own court can claim, Mother, and you know it." A flicker of something crosses the queen's face at those words, gone too quickly for Ethan to identify. She turns her attention back to him fully, and he forces himself to meet her gaze rather than look away. "You," she says, the translator carrying her words with cold precision, "tell me what you did. In your own words. Leave nothing out." Ethan glances briefly at Lyra, who gives him the smallest nod of encouragement, before he speaks. "I saw something fall from the sky. I went looking. Found her ship torn open. Found her bleeding and barely breathing inside it. I pulled her out, stopped the bleeding best I could with what I had, and carried her back to my home. I kept watch over her until she was strong enough to wake up and start healing on her own. That's all. I didn't know who she was. I didn't ask what she was. She needed help. I've spent enough of my life around people who needed help to know what that looks like, and I wasn't about to walk away from it." Silence follows his words, stretching long enough that Ethan begins to wonder if he has said something wrong. The queen's expression remains unreadable, her golden eyes studying him with an intensity that makes the back of his neck prickle with unease. "You are a soldier," she says finally. "It is not a question." "Was," Ethan replies. "A long time ago now. And yet the instinct remains," the queen says quietly, almost to herself. She turns to one of the armored figures beside her and exchanges a few low words Ethan cannot catch, even with the translator, as though the device has been deliberately excluded from that particular exchange. The guard's expression shifts, surprise flickering across features otherwise trained to remain neutral. Lyra watches this exchange with visible tension, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Mother, what are you discussing?" The queen turns back to face them both, and when she speaks again, her voice carries a weight that seems to settle over the entire clearing like a physical thing. "There is a law among our people, older than the current dynasty, older than most records still preserved in our archives. It concerns those who save the life of one bound by royal blood, at risk to themselves, expecting nothing in return. Ethan feels Lyra go very still beside him. "Mother," she says slowly, "surely you do not mean—" "I mean exactly what the law demands," the Queen says, and for the first time, something almost like sorrow passes briefly across her composed features, before vanishing again, behind the mask of authority she wears like armor. "This changes everything, and I am afraid, human, that returning to whatever simple life you lived before tonight is no longer a choice available to you." The words hang in the cold night air, and Ethan feels the ground shift beneath him in a way that has nothing to do with the earth itself. Beside him, Lyra's face has gone pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and something that looks unmistakably like fear, not for herself, but for him. "Explain it to him," Lyra says, her voice tight. "Tell him what you mean, Mother. Do not leave him standing here with only half the truth." The Queen studies Ethan for a long moment before continuing, her tone shifting into something more formal, almost ceremonial, as though reciting words she has known since childhood, but rarely had cause to speak aloud. "Among our people, there exists an ancient bond called the life debt. When one being, of any origin, saves the life of a royal heir through selfless action, expecting no reward, a bond is formed between them, recognized by law and by the deeper currents that hold our society together. It is not slavery, it is not punishment, but it is not easily undone, and it does not simply fade with distance or time." "What does it mean exactly?" Ethan asks carefully.
In practical terms, what happens now?
"It means," the Queen says, "that until the bond is properly resolved through the rites our law demands, you cannot simply return to your quiet life here and forget this ever happened. The universe does not work that cleanly, human. What you began the moment you pulled my daughter from that wreckage, you must now see through to its conclusion." Lyra steps forward, closing the distance between herself and her mother. "Mother, he has a life here, a home, people who may look for him if he vanishes. You cannot simply remove him from everything he knows without his consent." "I did not say without his consent," the Queen replies evenly. "The law requires acknowledgement, not force. But make no mistake, Lyra, refusing the bond carries its own consequences. For him, and potentially for you as well. The rites exist for good reason. They were not written by fools." Ethan looks between the two of them, the weight of the moment pressing down on him even though he barely understands the full shape of what is being decided. "Can somebody explain what actually happens if I say yes, or if I say no?" The Queen's gaze settles on him again, and this time there is less coldness in it, replaced by something more measured, almost curious. "If you decline the bond, formally and before witnesses, the debt transfers instead to a burden carried by my daughter and by our house, a weight of unpaid honor that follows royal bloodlines for generations, until properly settled through other means, often at great cost. If you accept, you agree to travel with us, to stand before the full council, and to allow the rites to determine what role you will hold going forward. It is not imprisonment, but it is also not a small thing to walk away from once begun." Ethan feels Lyra's eyes on him, searching, worried, though she says nothing further, apparently unwilling to influence a decision that the Queen has made clear must be his own. He thinks of his empty cabin, the quiet life he built for himself after years of chaos, the truck he was fixing when the sky first split open 3 nights ago. He thinks, too, of the way Lyra's hand had curled weakly against his during that first long night, unwilling to let go even in her sleep. "If I go," Ethan says slowly, "what happens to her? To Lyra?" The Queen's expression flickers with something unreadable. "That depends greatly on what the Council decides, and on factors that are, at present, still under investigation. The attack on her ship," Ethan says. "It is not a question." The Queen's eyes narrow slightly. "You know of this?" "She told me, said it wasn't an accident." The Queen turns to look at Lyra with an expression that carries both concern and something sharper, something closer to calculation. "We will discuss this further aboard the ship, in private," she says. Then, turning back to Ethan, her voice regains its formal weight. "Human, your answer. I will not ask again this night." Ethan glances once more at Lyra, whose expression has settled into something quietly hopeful, despite the tension still lining her features. He thinks of the panic in her eyes when she first opened them in the wreckage, the desperate word she repeated over and over before losing consciousness, a word he still does not know the meaning of. Whatever this bond truly requires of him, walking away now, knowing that doing so might place a burden on her that she never asked for, does not sit right with him. "I'll go," Ethan says. A ripple of surprise moves through the gathered guards, quickly suppressed but not entirely hidden. The Queen studies him for a long moment, as though searching for hesitation or regret in his expression, finding none. "Very well," she says finally. "Gather what you require from your dwelling. We depart within the hour." The next 60 minutes pass in a blur for Ethan. He moves through his cabin gathering only what feels essential, a few changes of clothes, an old photograph of his parents, the worn paperback book Lyra had been curious about days earlier. Lyra follows him inside, watching quietly as he packs, occasionally reaching out to touch an object with the same curious fascination she showed during her recovery, though now tinged with something more solemn. "You did not have to say yes," she tells him softly, as he zips his bag closed. "I know," Ethan replies. "Then why?" He considers the question for a moment, weighing an honest answer against the simpler ones available to him. "Because leaving you to carry a burden I created doesn't sit right with me. And because I've spent a long time wondering what else might be out there, past the sky I grew up looking at. Guess I'm about to find out." Lyra's expression softens into something that looks, for just a moment, like the beginning of a genuine smile, quickly restrained, but not entirely hidden. "My mother is not an easy woman to please," she warns him. "The council even less so. There will be those who see you only as a curiosity, or worse, as a threat to be managed. I've dealt with difficult people before," Ethan says, slinging the bag over his shoulder. "I'll manage." Outside, the ship waits in the clearing, its outer hull glowing softly against the darkness, guards positioned at even intervals around its base. As Ethan approaches with Lyra at his side, the Queen watches from the open entrance, her expression unreadable once more, though something in the set of her shoulders suggests the conversation from earlier still weighs on her mind. "Understand this, human," she says as he steps closer. "Once we leave this world, you will be entering a place governed by rules and history, far older than anything your species has yet built. I will not pretend the path ahead is simple, or that every member of my court will welcome your presence with open arms. Many will question why an outsider, and a primitive one at that by the standards of our civilization, has been granted such consideration under our oldest laws. I'm not asking for special treatment," Ethan says. "I just did what felt right. Whatever comes next, I'll deal with it as it comes." The Queen studies him a moment longer, something shifting subtly behind her composed exterior, before she turns and gestures for them to board. "We shall see if that confidence survives the council chamber," she says, though there is less coldness in the words than there was earlier, replaced by something that might, if Ethan did not know better, almost pass for grudging respect. As they step aboard the ship, the interior reveals itself to be far larger than its exterior suggested. Curved corridors lit with soft ambient light, walls that seem to shift color gently as they pass, technology so far beyond anything Ethan has encountered that he finds himself simply staring, unable to fully process what he is seeing. Lyra stays close beside him, occasionally offering quiet explanations for the stranger sights, her earlier fear slowly giving way to something warmer as she watches him take in her world for the first time. The ship lifts off without so much as a tremor, the ground falling away beneath them through a viewport along the corridor, the familiar shape of the forest and his small cabin shrinking rapidly into darkness below. Ethan watches until it disappears entirely, swallowed by clouds, and then by the growing blackness of space itself, stars appearing in numbers and clarity he has never witnessed from the ground. "Second thoughts?" Lyra asks quietly, watching his face. Ethan continues staring out at the vast field of stars stretching endlessly before them, a small, unexpected smile forming at the corner of his mouth, despite the uncertainty pressing at the edges of his thoughts. "Ask me again once I meet this council of yours," he says. "For now, I think I just want to look." Beside him, Lyra allows herself a small, quiet laugh, the first genuine sound of ease since the ship first arrived in the clearing. Neither of them speaks further as the ship carries them away from Earth, away from everything Ethan has ever known, toward a world and a fate neither of them can yet fully predict, bound together now by a law far older than either of their individual lives, and by a choice that Ethan made in the space of a single moment, standing in a dark forest clearing, without ever fully understanding what it would come to mean. The journey takes 3 full days by the ship's own measure of time, though Ethan quickly loses any real sense of hours passing, the ship's interior lighting cycling gently between brighter and dimmer phases, to mimic something like day and night. He spends much of the journey with Lyra, who takes it upon herself to teach him fragments of her language, laughing softly at his mispronunciations, in a way that feels less like mockery, and more like genuine warmth growing between them. She tells him more about her world during these quiet hours, about the ancient council that governs alongside the queen, about the delicate balance of power between the various noble houses that have, for generations, competed quietly for influence within the court. She speaks carefully around the subject of the attack on her ship, though Ethan senses she knows more than she has yet shared, perhaps waiting until they are somewhere she trusts to speak freely. On the final evening before their arrival, standing together at the viewport as a distant glowing planet grows larger ahead of them, its surface marked with pale cliffs and shimmering seas unlike anything on Earth, Lyra turns to him with an expression more serious than he has seen from her since the night in the clearing. "Whatever happens once we arrive," she says quietly, "whatever the council decides, whatever my mother ultimately determines regarding the bond between us, I want you to know that none of this diminishes what you did for me. You saved my life, expecting nothing in return. That matters more on my world than perhaps you yet understand." Ethan looks at her, then back out at the approaching planet, its beauty both alien and strangely calming. "I didn't do it for a reward," he says, "but I appreciate you saying that." "I know," Lyra says softly. "That is precisely why it matters so much." The ship begins its descent shortly after, the planet's surface rising to meet them, revealing details Ethan could not make out from a distance. Vast cities built into the pale cliffs just as Lyra had described, structures that seemed to grow organically from the stone, rather than simply built upon it, lights glowing warmly across the landscape, as evening settles over this distant, beautiful world. Whatever waits for him below, in the halls of a council he has never met, under laws he barely understands, Ethan finds himself steadying his breathing, the way he once did before difficult missions long ago, preparing himself for whatever comes next, unwilling to let uncertainty show on his face, even as it churns quietly beneath the surface. The ship lands within a courtyard carved from pale stone, surrounded by towering structures that rise gracefully toward the twilight sky, their surfaces etched with patterns that seem to glow faintly as the light dims. A crowd has gathered at a respectful distance, drawn by the arrival of the royal vessel, and Ethan feels the weight of countless unfamiliar eyes settle on him the moment he steps down onto the landing platform beside Lyra. Whispers ripple through the gathered onlookers, quiet but unmistakable, and Ethan catches enough fragments through the translator device Lyra insists he keep close, to understand that word of his presence has already begun to spread. A human, walking freely beside the princess. Some voices carry curiosity. Others carry something colder, edged with suspicion that makes the back of his neck prickle with familiar unease. A tall figure detaches from the crowd and approaches with purposeful strides, dressed in robes of deep blue, marked with silver embroidery, that catches the fading light. His expression is composed, but his eyes, when they settle on Ethan, hold a sharpness that immediately sets him apart from the simple curiosity of the onlookers.
Lord Corin!
Lyra says, her tone shifting subtly, formal and guarded.
I did not expect you to greet us personally.
Word travels quickly, Princess, the man replies smoothly, his gaze still fixed on Ethan. News of an attack on your vessel, followed by your rescue at the hands of a primitive species, tends to command attention throughout the court. He is not primitive, Lyra says sharply. He is the reason I am standing here at all. Lord Corin's expression does not change, though something flickers briefly behind his eyes, gone before Ethan can fully identify it. Of course, forgive my poor choice of words. I only meant to say that such circumstances are unusual, and unusual circumstances tend to draw a great deal of attention within the council chamber. The Queen steps forward before the exchange can continue, her presence immediately drawing every eye in the courtyard, conversations quieting as she passes. "Lord Corrin," she says evenly, "you will have your opportunity to voice concerns before the full council tomorrow, as is proper. Tonight, my daughter requires rest, and our guest requires time to adjust to surroundings entirely foreign to him." Lord Corrin bows slightly, though the gesture carries a formality that feels more like performance than genuine deference. "Of course, my queen. I merely wish to extend my personal welcome to our guest." His eyes settle on Ethan one final time before he turns and disappears back into the thinning crowd, leaving behind an unease that lingers long after he is gone. "Who was that?" Ethan asks quietly, once they are moving again toward the palace entrance. "A member of the council," Lyra answers, her voice carefully neutral, though tension remains visible in the set of her shoulders. "One who has never fully supported my mother's rule, and who has, on more than one occasion, argued for closer ties with houses that stand opposed to our own. He is clever and patient, and I would advise caution around him." "Noted," Ethan says simply, filing the warning away. Alongside the growing list of unfamiliar names and rivalries he is quickly realizing he must learn to navigate. The palace interior proves even more striking than the ship that carried them. Vast halls carved from the same pale stone as the cliffs outside, softened by warm lighting, and tall windows that overlook the shimmering sea beyond the city. Servants move quietly through the corridors, offering respectful bows toward Lyra and curious, careful glances toward Ethan, none openly hostile, though none entirely welcoming either. He is given quarters near Lyra's own chambers, simple but comfortable by the standards of the palace, and left alone for the first time since the ship departed Earth 3 days earlier. Sitting on the edge of an unfamiliar bed, in an unfamiliar room, on an unfamiliar world, Ethan allows himself, finally, a moment to simply breathe, the accumulated weight of the past several days settling heavily across his shoulders. A soft knock interrupts his thoughts. Lyra stands in the doorway when he opens it, having changed from her travel clothes into something simpler, her expression carrying a tiredness that mirrors his own. "I wanted to check that you were settling in," she says. "Tomorrow will not be easy. The council can be difficult, particularly regarding matters they consider unprecedented, and your presence here qualifies as exactly that." "I appreciate the warning," Ethan says, leaning against the doorframe. "Any advice? Before I walk into a room full of people who'd rather I wasn't here." Lyra considers the question seriously. "Answer honestly. Do not attempt to flatter them, or pretend knowledge of our customs you do not possess. The council respects honesty, even when it disagrees with what is said. And," she adds, a small, tired smile touching her lips, "try not to let Lord Corrin unsettle you. He thrives on making others doubt themselves." "I'll keep that in mind," Ethan says. Lyra lingers a moment longer in the doorway, an unspoken warmth passing between them that neither quite acknowledges aloud. "Thank you," she says finally, "for coming this far. I know it was not an easy choice." "Wasn't really a choice at all," Ethan admits. "Not one I could have lived with making differently anyway." She holds his gaze a moment longer, before offering a quiet good night and retreating down the corridor toward her own chambers, leaving Ethan alone once more with his thoughts, and with the growing certainty that whatever awaits him in that council chamber tomorrow will test him in ways far different from anything he has faced before. Sleep comes slowly that night, his mind turning over everything he has witnessed since the sky first split open above his cabin, the strange new world stretching outside his window, glowing faintly under twin moons that cast pale light across unfamiliar architecture. Somewhere within these palace walls, he knows, decisions are already being made about his fate, about the ancient bond now tying his life to a princess he barely knows yet, already feels fiercely protective of, and about a conspiracy, still lurking unresolved beneath the surface of polite court formality, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself fully. The council chamber the next morning is unlike anything Ethan expected. A vast circular room open to the sky above, its walls lined with tiered seating, occupied by dozens of robed figures whose eyes fix on him the moment he enters at Lyra's side. The queen sits at the center on a raised platform, flanked by 2 advisors, her expression composed and unreadable as she surveys the gathered council. Lord Corrin sits among the front rows, his posture relaxed in a way that Ethan immediately distrusts. the calm of someone who already believes he holds the advantage in whatever argument is about to unfold. The proceedings begin formally, a recitation of the ancient law governing life debts, read aloud by one of the Queen's advisors, followed by an account of the events in the forest clearing, delivered with careful precision by Lyra herself. Ethan listens, standing quietly beside her, aware of the weight of dozens of unfamiliar gazes, evaluating every detail of her testimony. When Lyra finishes, Lord Corran rises smoothly from his seat, his voice carrying easily across the open chamber. "A moving account, Princess. No one here doubts your gratitude toward this human, nor the sincerity of his actions in that forest. But gratitude is not the question before this council. The question is whether an untested species, one with no formal ties to our alliance, no understanding of our laws beyond what has been hastily explained to him in recent days, should be granted standing within our court, under an ancient rite meant to honor those who understand the full weight of what they accept." Murmurs ripple through the gathered council, some nodding in apparent agreement, others watching Ethan with renewed scrutiny. "He does not need to understand every nuance of your customs to have acted with honor," Lyra counters, stepping forward. "The law does not require prior knowledge of our ways, only selfless action in the moment it was needed. He met that requirement fully. Selfless, perhaps, Lord Corran allows, though one might also argue convenient, given that saving a life so easily secures such considerable favor with the crown." His eyes shift toward Ethan directly. "Tell me, human, did you know at the time that the woman you pulled from that wreckage was royalty?" "No," Ethan answers plainly. "Didn't know what she was at all. Knew she was dying. That was enough." "A noble answer," Lord Corran says smoothly, though his tone suggests he finds it anything but convincing. Easily given after the fact, of course, once the considerable benefits of the arrangement have already become apparent. Ethan feels heat rise in his chest, though he keeps his voice level. "I didn't ask for benefits. Didn't ask for any of this, honestly. I just did what needed doing. If that's a problem for you, that's on you, not me." A ripple of surprised murmurs moves through the chamber at his directness, and for a brief moment, Ethan wonders if he has overstepped some unspoken rule of court conduct. But the Queen, watching from her platform, allows the faintest suggestion of approval to cross her features before smoothing it away again into careful neutrality. "The council has heard enough for today's session," she announces, rising from her seat with an authority that immediately quiets the chamber. "The matter of the bond will be formally decided within 3 days' time, following further review. Until then, the human remains under this palace's protection, as does my daughter." The session ends with considerably more tension than it began, council members filing out in murmuring clusters, several casting lingering glances toward Ethan as they pass. Lord Corran lingers longest, offering a slow, measured nod toward Ethan before departing, a gesture that feels less like respect and more like quiet warning. "That went about as well as I could have hoped, all things considered," Lyra says once the chamber has mostly emptied, though the tightness around her eyes suggests she is more troubled than her words let on. "Doesn't feel like a win," Ethan replies honestly. "It is not a loss either," Lyra says, which, with Lord Corran involved, counts for a great deal. Over the following 2 days, Ethan finds himself increasingly drawn into the rhythms of palace life, guided constantly by Lyra, who seems determined that he understand as much as possible before the council's final decision. He meets members of the household staff, several of whom regard him with open curiosity rather than suspicion, and slowly begins piecing together a clearer picture of the political tensions running beneath the surface of the court. It becomes clear, through careful conversations and things left unsaid, that Lord Corran belongs to a faction within the nobility that has long argued for closer alliances with outside powers, powers that some among the Queen's most trusted advisors believe played a role in the attack on Lyra's ship. Nothing has been proven, but the suspicion hangs heavily in every guarded conversation Ethan overhears. On the evening of the second day, walking together through a quiet garden overlooking the sea, Lyra finally shares what she has been reluctant to voice since their arrival. "I believe someone within our own court arranged the attack on my ship," she admits quietly, her eyes fixed on the horizon rather than on him. The weapon signature matched technology not commonly used by raiders. It was precise, deliberate, Whoever struck my ship knew exactly which vessel to target and exactly when I would be traveling alone. Ethan absorbs this quietly, the pieces of the past several days settling into a darker, more coherent shape in his mind. You think it's Corin. I suspect him, Lyra corrects carefully. Suspicion is not proof, and accusing a member of the council without evidence would be reckless, particularly given how carefully he has positioned himself to appear above reproach. So what do we do? Lyra turns to look at him, something resolute settling into her expression. We find proof, quietly, before the council's final decision regarding the bond, if possible. Because if Lord Corin succeeds in delaying or dismantling my mother's ruling, he gains considerable leverage, both against you and against the crown itself. The following day, Ethan finds himself drawn deeper into palace intrigue than he ever anticipated, accompanying Lyra on quiet visits to trusted members of the household staff, piecing together fragments of information about ship movements, unusual transactions, and whispered conversations overheard in corridors rarely frequented by nobility. It is slow, careful work, the kind Ethan recognizes from years of gathering intelligence in far more dangerous circumstances, and he finds an odd comfort in having a clear task to focus on amid the overwhelming strangeness of his new surroundings. By the evening before the council's final session, they have gathered enough scattered fragments to form a troubling picture, though nothing yet conclusive enough to present formally. A trusted engineer within the palace's own fleet recalls unusual maintenance requests filed shortly before Lyra's departure, requests that, upon closer examination, appear to have quietly disabled several of her ship's defensive systems without her knowledge. This isn't enough on its own, Lyra says, studying the maintenance records spread across a table in her private study, frustration evident in her tightened jaw. It proves negligence, perhaps, but not intent, and certainly not a direct connection to Lord Corin. Then we need to find who filed the request, Ethan says. Someone approved it. Someone signed off on it. That trail has to lead somewhere. Before Lyra can respond, a soft knock interrupts them, and a young servant slips quietly into the room, glancing nervously over her shoulder, before speaking in a hushed voice. She has information, she explains carefully. Information she has been afraid to share until now, regarding the maintenance request in question, and the individual who quietly authorized it under a falsified seal. As the servant speaks, laying out details Ethan can only partially follow through the translator's steady hum, he watches Lyra's expression shift from cautious hope to something colder, harder, the look of someone finally seeing clearly the shape of a betrayal that has been circling her for days without fully revealing itself. We have him, Lyra says quietly, once the servant has finished and slipped back out of the room as carefully as she entered. Or at least, we have enough now to bring before my mother directly, before the council convenes tomorrow. Ethan feels the tension in the room shift into something sharper, more urgent. Then we'd better move fast. If Corin finds out what you know before we get to your mother, there's no telling what he'll do to keep this buried. Lyra nods, already moving toward the door, her earlier caution replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. Then we do not waste another moment, she says, and Ethan falls into step beside her, the quiet palace corridors suddenly feeling far more dangerous than they had just hours before, every shadow now carrying the weight of a threat neither of them can afford to underestimate. They move quickly through the palace, taking a route Lyra clearly knows well, avoiding the main corridors in favor of quieter passages used mostly by staff. Ethan keeps close beside her, senses alert in a way he has not felt since his years of service, every instinct trained by past danger, now fully engaged. The palace at night feels different from the one he walked through in daylight, shadows stretching longer across the pale stone, the distant sound of the sea replaced by an unsettling stillness. They are nearly to the Queen's private wing when a figure steps out from a side corridor, blocking their path with quiet, deliberate calm. Lord Corin stands before them, his expression carrying none of the composed neutrality he displayed in the council chamber, replaced instead by something colder, more direct. "Princess," he says smoothly, "and her devoted guardian. Out rather late this evening, are we not?" "Step aside, Lord Corin," Lyra says, her voice steady, despite the tension visibly gathering in her shoulders. "We have urgent matters to discuss with my mother." "Urgent matters," Corin repeats, his eyes flicking briefly toward the folded records Lyra holds against her side. I imagine they concern the maintenance logs you have spent the past 2 days quietly investigating. Lyra's expression hardens, though she does not answer directly. Ethan steps slightly forward, positioning himself between her and Corin without conscious thought, an old instinct resurfacing without hesitation. Careful, human, Corin says, his gaze shifting to Ethan with open disdain now that the pretense of courtesy has fallen away. You are a guest in a world you barely understand, standing in the way of matters far larger than a single life debt. I understand enough, Ethan says evenly. Enough to know you're trying to stop us from reaching the Queen tonight. Corin's expression flickers, just briefly, confirming what neither Ethan nor Lyra had yet dared to say aloud with certainty. You misunderstand my intentions entirely, he says, though the words carry less conviction than before. I merely wish to speak with the princess privately, regarding concerns I have about the company she has recently chosen to keep. There is nothing you have to say to me that cannot be said in front of him, Lyra replies sharply. Step aside, Lord Corin. This is not a request. For a long, tense moment, Corin does not move, his eyes moving between them with calculating stillness, clearly weighing his options. Then, slowly, a thin smile spreads across his face, though it does not reach his eyes. Of course, Princess. Forgive my concern. I only ever wish to see this court protected from threats it may not yet fully recognize. He steps aside with exaggerated courtesy, allowing them to pass, though his gaze follows Ethan with open hostility as they move by. Neither of them speaks again until they are well past him, moving quickly now toward the Queen's private chambers, the earlier urgency in their steps sharpened further by the unsettling encounter. He knows we're close, Lyra says quietly, once they are alone again in the corridor, which means we cannot afford to wait any longer. They reach the Queen's chambers minutes later, and after a brief exchange with the guards stationed outside, are quickly admitted. The Queen rises from her seat the moment she sees the urgency written across both their faces, setting aside whatever documents she had been reviewing. What has happened? She asks immediately. Lyra wastes no time, laying the gathered records across the table between them, and explaining quickly, clearly, everything they have uncovered over the past 2 days. The falsified maintenance seal, the disabled defensive systems, the servant's testimony, and finally, the tense encounter with Lord Corin only minutes earlier in the corridor. The Queen's expression grows increasingly severe as the account unfolds, her hands tightening slowly at her sides. When Lyra finishes, silence settles over the room for a long moment before the Queen finally speaks. This is a serious accusation, she says carefully, and one that cannot be acted upon carelessly, regardless of how compelling the evidence appears. Lord Corin holds considerable influence within the council. Moving against him without absolute certainty risks fracturing this court at a moment when unity matters more than ever. Mother, he nearly had me killed, Lyra says, frustration breaking through her earlier composure. How much more certainty do you require? The Queen's gaze softens slightly as it settles on her daughter, though the weight of responsibility remains heavy in her expression. I require enough certainty that when I act decisively, and without leaving room for him to twist this into an accusation of royal overreach against a member of the council. Believe me, Lyra, I want nothing more than to see whoever endangered you brought to full accountability. But we must be precise. Ethan, who has remained quiet through most of the exchange, finally speaks. Then let us get you precise. Give us until tomorrow morning, before the council convenes. We'll find whatever's still missing. The Queen studies him for a long moment, something calculating, but not unkind behind her golden eyes. You have proven more resourceful than I initially expected, human. Very well. You have until morning. But understand, if Lord Corin realizes how close you have come to exposing him before we are ready to act, he will not hesitate to protect himself by whatever means remain available to him. Tread carefully, both of you. As they leave the Queen's chambers a short while later, the weight of the coming hours settles heavily over them both. The quiet palace corridors no longer feeling safe in the way they once did. Every shadow now a potential threat. Every quiet corner a place where danger might be waiting. Ethan glances at Lyra as they walk, her jaw set with quiet determination despite the exhaustion visible beneath it, and feels something settle firmly into place within himself. a resolve that has little to do with ancient laws or life debts, and everything to do with simply refusing to let harm reach her again, whatever it costs him to prevent it. Neither of them sleeps that night. Instead, they work through the remaining hours in Lyra's private study, cross-referencing the maintenance records against fleet assignment logs, searching for the single thread that will connect the falsified seal directly to Lord Corran, rather than to some intermediary who might still claim innocence on his behalf. The trusted engineer returns near midnight with additional records, quietly retrieved from an archive not commonly accessed by anyone outside Senior Fleet Command, and Ethan watches as Lyra's expression shifts slowly from frustration to something sharper, more focused, as the pieces finally begin fitting together. "Here," she says finally, close to dawn, pointing to a line of text glowing faintly on the display before them. "This authorization code. It matches a private terminal, registered to Lord Corran's personal staff, not the General Maintenance Office. Someone tried to disguise it, but the underlying signature is unmistakable." Ethan leans closer, studying the data, even though much of it remains foreign to him. "That's enough, isn't it? That connects him directly." "It connects his staff," Lyra says carefully, "which is not quite the same as connecting him personally, though it will be difficult for him to explain convincingly otherwise." She sits back, exhaustion and relief mixing in her expression. "It should be enough, combined with the servant's testimony and the disabled defense logs, to bring formal charges before the council." They bring the completed evidence to the Queen just as the first light of dawn begins spilling through the palace windows, and though exhaustion weighs visibly on all three of them, the Queen's expression sharpens with grim satisfaction as she reviews the final compiled records. "This will do," she says quietly. "This will do very well indeed." She looks up at them both, something like pride flickering briefly across her composed features. "You have done in 2 days what my own investigators failed to accomplish in as many weeks." The council convenes within the hour. We will present this evidence together. The council chamber feels different that morning, charged with an energy that was absent during the earlier session, word having apparently spread that something significant is about to unfold. Lord Corran takes his seat among the front rows with his usual composed confidence, though Ethan notices a flicker of unease cross his features when the Queen enters flanked not only by her usual advisors, but by Lyra and Ethan as well, the compiled evidence carried carefully in a sealed record case. The Queen wastes no time once the session formally opens, presenting the evidence methodically before the assembled council, her voice carrying clearly across the open chamber as she details the falsified maintenance seal, the disabled defensive systems, the private terminal registered to Lord Corran's own staff. Murmurs ripple steadily louder through the gathered nobles as the account unfolds, eyes shifting increasingly toward Lord Corran, whose composed expression begins, for the first time since Ethan has known him, to crack at the edges. "This is a fabrication," Corran says sharply, rising from his seat as the Queen finishes. "Convenient evidence, gathered hastily by a princess, desperate to protect her human companion's newfound standing within this court, and presented with theatrical timing, designed to sway the council before today's final decision on the bond." "The evidence stands on its own merit, Lord Corran," the Queen replies evenly, "regardless of when it was uncovered. If you dispute its accuracy, you are welcome to explain how a private terminal registered to your personal staff came to authorize the disabling of my daughter's defensive systems, mere hours before her ship was struck." Silence falls over the chamber, heavy and absolute, every eye now fixed on Lord Corran, whose composure has fully abandoned him, replaced by something colder and more desperate. For a long moment he says nothing, and in that silence, Ethan sees the truth, confirmed as clearly as any spoken confession could provide. "Whatever I have done," Corran says finally, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "I have done for the future of this court, not against it. Our alliance with outside powers grows weaker by the year, while this crown clings stubbornly to isolation and outdated tradition. I sought only to force a reckoning, to demonstrate the vulnerabilities that leave us exposed, while the crown wastes its attention on primitive worlds and sentimental rescues. You attempted to have my daughter killed," the Queen says, her voice dropping into something dangerously quiet, "to prove a political point about alliances you personally favor. There is no justification broad enough to excuse that choice, Lord Corran. and you will answer for it fully before this council and beyond it." Guards move forward at a subtle signal from the Queen, and Lord Corrin, recognizing finally that no further argument will save him, allows himself to be led from the chamber without further resistance, though his eyes carry a bitter, simmering resentment as they pass over Ethan one final time before he disappears from the room entirely. The chamber remains in stunned silence for several long moments after his departure, before erupting into a wave of urgent, overlapping conversation among the council members, the political implications of what has just occurred clearly settling over the room with considerable weight. The Queen allows the murmurs to continue for a while, before raising her hand, gradually restoring quiet across the chamber. "This matter will require further investigation and formal proceedings in the days ahead," she announces, "but for now, the immediate threat to my daughter's safety has been identified and addressed. I believe that resolves any remaining doubt regarding the sincerity and value of the actions taken by our human guest, both in the forest that first night and in the days since." Her gaze shifts to Ethan directly, and for the first time since their initial meeting in that dark clearing, her expression carries something unmistakably warm beneath its formal composure. The council will now proceed to the matter first raised 3 days ago, the formal recognition of the life-debt bond between this human, Ethan Cole, and the royal house. The formal rites that follow are unlike anything Ethan expected, a ceremony conducted with quiet solemnity rather than grandeur, ancient words spoken by the Queen in a language the translator renders only partially, leaving much of the ceremony's deeper meaning felt rather than fully understood. Lyra stands beside him throughout, her hand finding his at one point during the proceedings, a small gesture that steadies him more than he expects it to. When the ceremony concludes, the Queen turns to address him directly, her tone shifting into something more personal, less bound by formal ceremony. "The bond is now fully recognized before this council, and before the old laws that govern it," she says. "You are, from this day forward, considered kin to this house, bound not by blood, but by an act of selfless courage. This court will not soon forget." "What does that mean, exactly, going forward?" Ethan asks carefully. "It means," the Queen says, "that you are welcome within these walls, for as long as you choose to remain, protected under the full authority of this crown, and free to participate in the life of this court, should you desire it. It also means," she adds, her gaze shifting briefly toward Lyra before returning to him, "that certain expectations, informal though they may be, will naturally follow, given the closeness that has clearly developed between you and my daughter during these past days." A flush of color rises in Lyra's cheeks, though she does not look away from Ethan, her expression carrying quiet hope rather than embarrassment. "Mother," she says softly, "perhaps that particular conversation can wait until Ethan has had time to properly consider his choices. Perhaps," the Queen allows, a faint, rare smile touching her composed features. "Though I suspect the choice may already be closer to made than either of you fully realizes." Later that same evening, once the chamber has emptied and the weight of the day's events has begun to settle, Ethan finds a quiet moment alone with the young servant who first brought forward the evidence against Lord Corrin. She stands nervously near a side entrance, clearly uncertain whether her role in the day's outcome will bring her praise or unwanted attention. "You didn't have to come forward," Ethan tells her gently. "Took real courage, saying what you knew, especially against someone with that much power." The servant's expression eases slightly at his words. "I was afraid," she admits, through the translator's steady hum, "but I could not stay silent, knowing the princess had nearly died because of it. What you did, pulling her from that wreckage without knowing what she was, it reminded me that courage does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it simply does what is right, quietly, when no one is watching." Ethan considers her words long after she is gone, turning them over in his mind as he makes his way back through the quiet palace corridors. He thinks of the many small moments that led him here, the choice to run toward a falling star instead of away from it, the choice to stay awake through that long first night, the choice to say yes when the Queen offered him a path he barely understood. None of them had felt particularly brave in the moment. They had simply felt necessary. Over the following days, life within the palace gradually finds a new rhythm. The formal charges against Lord Corran proceed through channels far more complex than anything Ethan witnessed in that single council session, involving testimony from additional witnesses, careful review of fleet records stretching back months, and quiet negotiations among the noble houses eager to distance themselves from any association with his failed scheme. The Queen handles each development with the same measured composure Ethan has come to recognize as her defining trait: firm without ever tipping into cruelty, patient without ever appearing weak. Ethan finds himself increasingly welcomed within the palace's daily life, no longer regarded with the open suspicion that greeted his arrival. Members of the household staff begin greeting him by name rather than with cautious formality. Even members of the council, several of whom had watched his testimony with visible skepticism during that first session, now offer him measured respect, some even seeking his perspective on matters concerning Earth and its people, curious about a world their civilization has apparently observed from a distance, for generations without ever making formal contact. He spends long afternoons with Lyra, exploring parts of the city he has not yet seen, markets built into the cliffside where merchants sell goods gathered from a dozen different worlds, quiet libraries containing records stretching back further than written history on his own planet, observation decks offering views of stars and distant worlds that leave him quietly amazed each time he visits. Slowly, without quite realizing when it happened, the overwhelming strangeness of this new life begins to feel less like something imposed upon him and more like something he has genuinely chosen to embrace. One afternoon, sitting together in a quiet library alcove, while Lyra reviews reports related to the ongoing investigation, she glances up at him with a curious expression. "Do you ever think of returning?" she asks, "even briefly, to see your home again, now that the danger has passed?" Ethan considers the question honestly. "Sometimes," he admits. "Not because I regret being here. Just, there were people back there. Not many, but a few, who might wonder what happened to me. The Queen has already arranged for a discreet explanation to be delivered to those who might ask after you," Lyra says gently. "A transfer, a relocation. Nothing that would draw undue attention. You need not worry that your absence will cause anyone undue concern." "Efficient," Ethan says, managing a small smile despite the mixture of relief and quiet melancholy the news brings. "Guess that's one less thing to think about." "You could still visit, in time," Lyra offers. "Once matters here have settled further. I do not wish for you to feel as though choosing this life means severing every tie to the one you left behind." Ethan appreciates the offer, recognizing in it the same thoughtfulness that first drew him to her during those long, uncertain days in his cabin, when neither of them could fully communicate yet somehow still understood the most important things about each other regardless. "Maybe someday," he says. "For now, though, I think I'd rather focus on what's in front of me." In the days that follow, as the formal proceedings against Lord Corran continue quietly behind the scenes, and the court gradually settles back into its usual rhythms, Ethan finds himself walking often with Lyra through the palace gardens overlooking the sea, the strange new world around him slowly beginning to feel less foreign, and more, unexpectedly, like something approaching home. He thinks sometimes of his cabin back on Earth, of the truck he never finished repairing, of the quiet, solitary life he built there after years of service. He does not regret leaving it. He finds, somewhat to his own surprise, that he does not miss it either, not in the way he once might have expected. One evening, standing together at the edge of the garden as the twin moons rise slowly over the shimmering sea, Lyra turns to him with the same serious expression she wore the night before their arrival, though this time, warmth rather than worry fills her eyes. "You never told me," she says quietly, "why you truly chose to stay, beyond the bond itself. The law required your presence here for the rites, but it did not require you to remain afterward, nor to walk this closely beside me these past days." Ethan considers her for a long moment, the easy honesty that has carried him through every difficult moment since that first night in the forest settling comfortably over him once more. Guess somewhere between pulling you out of that wreck and standing in that council chamber, watching you fight for the truth, I stopped thinking of this as something I was obligated to do, he says. Started thinking of it as something I wanted to do. Still do, actually. Lyra's expression softens fully, the last traces of formal restraint falling away entirely. The old law calls it a life debt, she says softly. But I think, perhaps, It has become something considerably more than that. Yeah, Ethan agrees, looking out over the moonlit sea beside her. The vast unfamiliar sky above filled with stars he is only beginning to learn the names of. I think it has. They stand together in comfortable silence as the moons climb higher above the water. Two people from entirely different worlds, bound first by an ancient law neither of them fully chose, and now, more importantly, by something freely given between them, forged in the space of a single desperate night, and strengthened through every difficult day that followed. Whatever challenges still lie ahead, whatever remains of the old political tensions the Council must still resolve, Ethan finds himself facing the future with a steadiness he has not felt in years, certain of at least one thing, amid all the uncertainty of this strange new life he has chosen. He is exactly where he is meant to be.